Captain Elias Rourke had just returned from a routine escort mission, guiding a convoy of supply ships to a colony in the Outer Rim, when the order appeared on his console, encrypted, sealed with the crest of the Galactic War Council. Few humans had ever received such a summons. Even fewer had walked away unchanged. The words were short and formal. Captain Rourke, you are to present yourself before the Galactic War Council at the Central Chamber, Varela Prime. Your record is under review. Attendance is mandatory. Elias read it twice, then leaned back in his chair. A summons like this was rarely for praise. The council did not call commanders from across the stars just to shake hands. They called them to question, to test, to judge. Mara, his young ensign and aide, stepped onto the bridge, noticing the faint crease between his brows. Captain, bad news. He held up the tablet so she could see the council seal. Her eyes widened. You, before the council. She trailed off, searching for the right word. Unexpected, Elias finished for her. Yes, very. The journey to Varela Prime took 3 days at FTL. Each hour gave Elias more time to wonder what this was really about. His record was clean. His crews respected him. The fleet had never accused him of disobedience. And yet, there had been whispers that some among the council wanted to know the true extent of humanity's capability in war. When the Resolute emerged from hyperspace, Varela Prime filled the viewport, a planet of pale oceans and silver cities, with the massive spire of the Central Chamber at its heart. The spire seemed to pierce the sky itself, its upper floors lost in clouds. Landing clearance came quickly. Elias stepped off the shuttle into a wide plaza paved with black stone, surrounded by banners from 100 worlds. The air smelled faintly metallic, and the distant hum of traffic filled the silence between voices. Inside the central chamber was nothing like human halls of power. It was circular, vast enough to hold thousands, with tiered seating that rose high into the shadows. Every species had its own section, some in shadowed alcoves, others out in the open. The floor at the center was bare except for a single ring of light, the place where those summoned would stand. As Elias was led to that circle, he felt the weight of alien eyes on him. Some curious, some hostile, some unreadable. He recognized a few faces from reports. The insectoid ambassador of the Thrin Collective, the avian diplomat from the Avira clans, the scaled general of the Krax Dominion, the council chair, a tall figure with a face hidden behind an intricate mask, spoke. In a deep, resonant tone, Captain Elias Rourke of the Terran Fleet, you have been summoned to answer questions regarding your service during the Great Frontier Conflict. Elias gave a respectful nod. I will answer as truthfully as I can. The chair's masked head tilted slightly. We are aware of your victories. We are aware of your tactics. But numbers in a report do not reveal the measure of a warrior. Today, we will seek that measure. Mara, standing at the edge of the chamber as his aide, shifted uneasily. She knew this was no routine hearing. The insectoid ambassador's voice was like glass scraping over stone. Human, we ask you a simple question, one every warrior here has answered. What is your kill count? The words fell into the chamber like a weight dropped into still water. A ripple of silence followed. Elias did not answer right away. He felt dozens of gazes sharpen, waiting for him to speak. The council wanted a number, one they could compare, weigh, and judge against their own. But the truth was not the one they were expecting. He stood a little straighter, the light above catching the silver in his hair. If I am to give you a number, he said quietly, it will not be the one you think. The avian diplomat tilted its head, feathers shimmering. The reptilian general narrowed its eyes, and in the shadows, Mara felt her heart beat faster. She had seen Elias in battle, seen him choose the hard path, the long path, the one that cost them but saved others. The chair's voice broke the silence. Then tell us, Captain, tell us your number. Elias looked around the great circle, meeting eyes of every shape and color. "When I fought," he said slowly, "I did not count the lives I took. I counted the lives I saved." Gasps, murmurs, and a low rumble of disbelief moved through the chamber. The question had been asked, but the answer was going to change the conversation in ways no one here yet understood. And somewhere deep in that vast hall, the first seeds of something new began to take root. The council chamber was shaped like a great circle, with tiers rising high into the shadows. Every species had a seat here: insectoid with glassy eyes, tall reptilians with scaled necks, furred mammalians with sharp muzzles, avian forms with feathers that shimmered in the light. Above them, banners of their homeworlds hung like fragments of stars. And at the center, on the round floor beneath the council's light, stood Captain Elias Rourke of Earth. He could feel the weight of every gaze. Some eyes studied him with curiosity, others with quiet hostility. A few looked bored, as if the human captain was nothing special. But they were all waiting for the same thing, his answer. The insectoid ambassador, whose chitin caught the light like polished stone, leaned forward. Its voice was soft, yet carried to every corner of the hall. "Human," it began, "in the records of war, we measure worth by the number of lives one has taken from the enemy. You fought in the great frontier conflict. We ask you now, what is your kill count?" The question echoed in the vast room. The words were heavy, as if the answer could change the way the galaxy saw humanity forever. Elias didn't speak right away. His expression remained calm, but inside, thoughts moved like slow, deep water. He had been asked many questions in his life: tactical questions, moral questions, even foolish ones. But this was different. This was not curiosity about strategy or culture. This was a test. He knew what they expected. In most warrior cultures represented here, kill count was a badge of honor, proof of skill and courage. Many of these leaders had once stood in the same place and given their own numbers proudly, as if reciting a song. But Elias had never kept such a count. The silence began to grow uncomfortable. An avian delegate tilted its head, feathers rustling. A reptilian tapped sharp claws against its desk. In the corner of the chamber, a young human ensign, Mara, his aide, watched with steady eyes. She was one of the few here who understood him well enough to know why he had not answered yet. The insectoid ambassador's antennae twitched. "Do you refuse to answer?" it asked. "Or do you fear to speak the truth?" Ilias's eyes lifted slowly to meet its gaze. "I fear nothing in this room," he said simply. His voice was calm, almost too quiet for the microphones, yet it carried in a way that made listeners lean forward. "But I do not measure myself by the number of lives I've ended." A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. To some, his words sounded like evasion. To others, they sounded like arrogance. Murmurs began, low at first, then growing. The council chair, an ancient being whose face was hidden behind a carved mask, raised a hand for silence. "Captain Rourke," the chair said, "this council demands clarity. What is your kill count? Give the number." Elias felt a strange stillness inside him. His mind drifted for a moment, unbidden, to memories that had never left him. He saw the skies over Vega Prime burning orange as evacuation ships rose, slow and vulnerable, into enemy fire. He saw the frantic loading bays of the Atlas Ark, where families clung to each other as soldiers worked desperately to buy them more time. He heard again the broken voice of a comms officer telling him a refugee convoy had made it through a blockade because his fleet had drawn the enemy away. Those were the numbers he remembered, the faces, the voices, the moments when survival had been won, sometimes by a thread. His thoughts returned to the present. The silence in the chamber was waiting for him again. He let his gaze travel across the tiers, past the scaled warriors with their shining medals, past the furred diplomats with their sharp teeth, past the bird-like elders whose eyes glittered like ice. "You want a number to measure me?" he said, but I will not give you the number you expect." A murmur rose again, sharper this time. Someone in the shadows laughed bitterly. Elias's voice stayed calm. "I did not keep count of the enemies I killed. That was never the measure that mattered to me. My count is different, and if you still wish to hear it, I will tell you." Some delegates shifted forward in their seats. Others leaned back, arms crossed, doubtful but curious. The insectoid ambassador's antennae curved slightly, as if in cautious interest. "Very well, human," it said. "We will hear your different measure. But know this, the council respects only strength." Elias gave a small nod. "Then, perhaps," he said, "you will learn that strength can be more than destruction." For a long moment, no one moved. The light above the chamber seemed to grow brighter, and the banners of 100 worlds hung still as stone. The question had been asked, but the answer, the real answer, had yet to come, and though no one knew it yet, that answer would leave the chamber in silence unlike any they had ever heard before. For a heartbeat, the grand chamber faded away. The glow of alien lights dimmed, and Captain Elias Rourke was no longer standing under the council's circle of illumination. In his mind, he was back among the dust and fire of Vega Prime. It had been the darkest week of the war. The human colonies had called for help, but no fleet was close enough to arrive in time, except his 37 ships, most of them old. Half of them patched together after earlier battles, were all he had to stand against an enemy force 5 times larger. Even now, years later, he could still feel the weight of that moment pressing on his chest. The enemy hadn't come to conquer, they had come to erase. Entire settlements were already gone when Elias's fleet dropped from FTL. The first thing he saw was the burning sky, clouds lit with the red glow of destruction. The second thing was the evacuation docks, still loaded with civilians, still unprotected. "Captain, we can't hold this line," his first officer had warned over the comms. "We need to retreat and regroup." But retreat meant death for every soul still on the planet. Elias's voice had been steady. "We buy them time. Every minute we hold, another family escapes." He didn't speak of victory. There was no victory to be had that day. Only survival. The battle began with chaos. The enemy's weapons were sharper, their armor stronger. Elias's fleet moved like a living shield, placing themselves between the evacuation ships and the incoming fire. Every order he gave was not about striking harder, but about holding longer, adjusting positions, rotating damaged ships out of the front line, sending shuttles to pick up survivors stranded in debris fields. Hours passed like years. On the surface, rescue crews worked without rest, loading mothers, fathers, and children into transports. Elias kept his focus, even as reports came in of ships that would not be returning. Another wave incoming. "Captain," the tactical officer had said during the 21st hour. Elias glanced at the evacuation timer. They needed 6 more hours for the last transport to launch. 6 hours felt impossible, but he gave the order to push forward, not to attack, but to lure the enemy away from the docks. The enemy took the bait. His smaller ships darted like fish through a school of sharks, drawing their hunters farther into space, away from the planet. Some of those ships never made it back, but the docks stayed safe. At hour 27, the last transport broke atmosphere. Elias's eyes had followed it as it rose into the black, carrying thousands of people who would see the next sunrise. Because his crews had refused to give in, only then did he order the retreat. His ships limped away, damaged and battered, but their mission complete. The memory shifted now. Elias stood in the control room of the long night convoy. Another desperate escape. This time the enemy had blockaded the main hyperspace lanes. Thousands of colonists were trapped on freighters with no weapons, only weeks of supplies. If they tried to run the blockade, they would be destroyed. Elias had come up with a plan that most thought was madness. He would take a small task force and create a decoy assault far from the convoy's path, drawing every hostile ship into the chase. For 2 days, they played a deadly game, diving into asteroid fields, skimming close to neutron stars, always keeping just ahead of destruction. And during those 2 days, the convoy slipped quietly through the gap and vanished into safe space. When Elias returned, battered and exhausted, the freighters were waiting for him in a quiet star system. The colonists had named that place Havens, Reach. And then there was the Synthos Belt. That memory was quieter, but no less heavy. Mining stations had been cut off from supply lines after a sudden offensive. Hundreds of wounded filled their med bays, with no hope of treatment before the infection spread. Elias had rerouted civilian freighters to act as hospital ships, packing them with medics and supplies, risking their safety to bring hope. 3 million lives had been saved there, without a single shot fired in anger. The chamber came back into focus slowly. The council's banners hung above him once again, the alien faces still watching. But for Elias, the numbers were not faceless. They were the miners who shook his hand, the children who clung to their parents, the quiet tears of a medic who had been able to save a patient, because the fleet had made it in time. He had never counted the enemies lost in those battles, but he could tell you the names of the colonies that still breathed because of them. These memories weren't glory. They weren't victories carved into history by triumph. They were moments where humanity refused to let the dark take everything. And to Elias, that had always been the only measure worth keeping. The silence in the chamber was heavy now, not just with curiosity, but with something sharper expectation. The council had heard of Captain Elias Rourke's victories. They had seen the reports, the battle diagrams, the statistics. But those were numbers in a file, not the man standing before them. Every delegate leaned forward in their own way. The insectoid ambassador's antennae swayed, reading the air. The reptilian general in the second tier tapped a claw slowly against the railing, a sound like distant thunder. The avian diplomat tilted its head, feathers glimmering under the light eyes unblinking. Even the smaller species, usually ignored in these sessions, craned to see better. They had asked the question. They wanted the number. But now they also wanted to see how he would say it, whether the human captain would speak with pride, shame, or defiance. Elias stood still in the center circle. His boots rested lightly on the polished floor, but his shoulders carried the quiet weight of years. He could feel the moment pressing on him, trying to shape his words before they left his mouth. Captain Rourke, the council chair, spoke, voice deep and even. The council is not interested in riddles. We require clarity. This chamber is a place for truth, not for games. Elias didn't flinch. I do not play games with lives, he replied calmly. That answer drew a ripple through the tiers. Some murmured to each other in quick alien tongues. A few scowled, clearly impatient. Mara, his young ensign, stood near the outer ring. Her gaze never left him. She had served beside him long enough to know what was coming, though even she didn't know exactly what words he would choose. The insectoid ambassador rose again, long arms folding over its chest. Do you understand, human, that every leader here has given their kill count before this council? That is our way. That is how we judge the strength of a warrior and the honor of a commander. I understand, Elias said, but that is not how I judge myself. A brief, sharp laugh came from the upper tiers, a guttural sound from a warlord whose armor still bore the marks of 100 battles. Then you are not a warrior, the warlord said. You are a coward, hiding behind words. Mara took a step forward, anger in her eyes, but Elias lifted a hand slightly, stopping her. His own voice was steady, almost gentle. You mistake mercy for weakness. That is the oldest error in the history of war. The words hung there. They didn't shout for attention. They demanded it quietly, and that made them heavier. He Let the pause stretch before continuing. You want my count? I could give you an estimate, but it would not mean what you think it means. To you, a high kill count is a mark of power. To me, it is a measure of how far we failed to prevent the war in the first place. The reptilian general's tapping claw stopped. Several pairs of alien eyes blinked slowly, as if trying to adjust to a new kind of light dot. Elias drew in a breath. When I took command of the Vega Prime defense, I did not think about how many enemies I could destroy. I thought about the children on the evacuation decks. I thought about the people who still believed the fleet would come for them. He took a step forward, voice still calm, but carrying more warmth now. That is why I do not keep the number you ask for. My measure is not in lives taken, but in lives saved. Somewhere in the chamber, a holodrone shifted, refocusing its lens. This was not the answer they had been expecting, and that made it all the more dangerous. The avian diplomat spoke, voice soft and musical. And yet, Captain Rourke, you. No, the Council does not measure leaders in this way. If you refuse to give your kill count, your standing among the great warrior species will be uncertain. I know, Elias said simply. But I also know that the measure of a person is not given by the Council. It is given by those who live because of the choices we make. The weight in the room shifted. It was no longer the weight of pressure. It was the weight of truth, pressing on everyone equally. Some shifted in discomfort. Some lowered their gaze. Others leaned back, thinking. Mara felt a strange sense of pride swell in her chest. She knew this wasn't just a moment for humanity. It was a moment for the entire galaxy to consider what kind of strength it truly respected. Elias stood there, quiet again, letting the tension breathe. He had not yet given them the number. But when he did, it would not be a weapon in their games. It would be a mirror they might not want to look into. The chair of the Council spoke once more, voice low but firm. Very well, Captain Rourke. The Council will hear your measure. Give us the number you keep. Elias looked around the great circle, meeting eyes of every kind. His voice, when it came, was steady and clear. 17 billion. The chamber froze. But that moment, that silence belonged to the next part of the story. The chamber was so quiet now that Elias could hear the faint hum of the translation systems, the soft hiss of breathing from species that didn't need lungs. Dozens of alien eyes, compound, slit-pupilled, or milky white, locked on him. The number he had spoken seemed to float in the air between them. 17 billion. The words had not been shouted. They had not been wrapped in pride or victory. He had delivered them the way a man might deliver a folded flag to a grieving family, with quiet respect and a deep understanding of what it meant. The insectoid ambassador was the first to speak, its voice less sharp than before. 17 billion. Lives ended. Elias shook his head slowly. No, 17 billion lives saved. A ripple moved through the Council tiers, not the sharp murmur of argument, but the softer sound of disbelief. Some delegates leaned forward, as if they had misheard. Others frowned, as though their minds were trying to rewrite the meaning to fit the world they knew. The reptilian general narrowed its golden eyes. You count lives preserved as your measure. It sounded, the word preserved, like something unfamiliar, as if it didn't quite fit in its mouth. That's right, Elias said. His voice was steady, but there was warmth in it now, the warmth of a truth he had carried alone for too long. Every battle I fought, every decision I made, I weighed in minutes, bought for an evacuation, in ships that made it past the blockade, in children who lived to see another day. Those are my numbers. That is my count. The warlord in the upper tiers gave a derisive snort, the sound echoing against the stone walls. And what does that make you? Human, a savior, a saint. War is for warriors, not caretakers. Elias turned his gaze toward the warlord, his expression calm. War, he said, is for protecting the people who cannot fight it. If you forget that, then the war owns you, and there is no honor in being owned by death. The words struck something in the air, like a slow wave moving outward. Some faces hardened, unwilling to bend to such an idea, but others, looked thoughtful. The avian diplomat lowered its bright feathers slightly, a gesture of respect in its culture. A small furred envoy from the outer colonies tapped its chest, a silent sign of agreement. Mara, standing near the shadows, felt her chest tighten. She had known this number for years, though never spoken in public. She remembered being on the bridge during some of those battles, watching Elias make decisions that cost them ships but saved entire cities. It had been hard, brutal work. Nothing like the tales of glorious conquest the galaxy loved to tell. The chair of the council leaned forward slightly. 17 billion lives saved, it repeated, as though testing the shape of the words. And how many lives taken? I never kept track, Elias answered simply. Because once you start counting the dead, you stop counting the living, and the living are why I fight. That, more than the number itself, seemed to unsettle them. Across the tiers, small murmurs began, not dismissive ones, but conversations. Questions whispered between species that had fought each other for centuries. The insectoid ambassador's antennae dipped low, a sign of deep thought. In all our records, it said, no warrior has stood before us and spoken this way. You have given us a measure we do not know how to weigh. Then maybe, Elias said gently, it's time to learn. The words weren't a challenge, they were an offering, and that was perhaps what made them more dangerous than a threat. The chamber lights shifted slightly as holodrones moved to capture every angle of his face, every movement of his hands. Across the galaxy, billions were already watching the broadcast. In war-driven cultures, warriors were idols. But here was a human who had turned the measure of war upside down in a single breath, in the highest tier. The avian diplomat spoke. Again, its voice almost like a song. You may not keep our measure of strength, Captain Rourke, but perhaps our measure is not the only one worth keeping. The council chair sat back slowly. The record will show the number given by the human captain. It will show the measure he chose. The chair's voice grew quieter, but the gravity in it was unmistakable, and it will be remembered. Elias gave a single, respectful nod. He felt no surge of triumph, no satisfaction in winning an argument. What he felt was a quieter thing, the knowledge that, for at least a moment, the galaxy had been made to pause and think, and sometimes, in the history of civilizations, that pause was where everything began to change. Mara watched him step back from the circle of light. He had given them the number they demanded, but not in the way they expected. She wondered how many of them would truly understand it. She wondered how many might start counting differently from this day forward. Somewhere deep inside her, she hoped the answer was enough. Asterisk news travels fast in the galaxy, but some news does not just travel. It spreads like a wave that shakes every shore it touches. Elias Rourke's words were that kind of news. Within hours, the number 17 billion lives saved was being replayed across every major broadcast channel. Holoscreens in market squares lit up with his calm face. Translations ran in hundreds of languages, each carrying the same quiet weight. On the farming moons of the Andrel system, workers paused in the fields to watch the clip, unsure. At first if they had heard correctly. On the military stations of the Crack's Dominion, hardened soldiers leaned forward, their jaws tight, their eyes narrowed, not out of anger, but because they had never been taught to measure strength this way. In the high cities of the Avira clans, diplomats gathered in glass towers to debate what it meant for the human species to speak of life, rather than death before the council. Some feared it was weakness. Others whispered that it might be something far more dangerous, an idea that could undermine centuries of warrior pride. Back on the council world, the reaction was immediate and divided. Delegates left the chamber still murmuring to each other, their steps slower than usual. Some avoided Elias entirely, unwilling to meet his gaze. Others sought him out quietly, not to speak on record, but to tell him they understood. A few simply gave him small nods, gestures that meant more than speeches. Mara noticed it all. She walked beside her captain through the long corridors, the echo of their footsteps following them. "They don't know what to do with you," she said quietly. "They don't need to," Elias replied. "They just need to remember. But you know some of them will twist it," she warned. "They'll say you were avoiding the question, that you were making humanity look soft." Elias gave her a faint smile. "Let them. Truth has a way of lasting longer than the noise around it." On the other side of the galaxy, in the war academies of the Ralvek Empire, young cadets argued over the footage. Some laughed at it. Others sat in silence, staring at the human captain, who spoke without boasting, who carried himself like a man with nothing to prove and everything to protect. In the outer colonies, where the scars of war still marked the land, the reaction was different. Their Elias's words found fertile ground. People who had lost much, and survived anyway, understood what it meant to value the living above all else. Messages began to pour into the Terran fleet's public channels. Some were simple, "Thank you for remembering us." Others were longer, telling stories of evacuation ships that had made it through because of orders he had given. The shockwave reached the galaxy's power brokers. The militaristic Dravax Alliance held an emergency meeting, concerned that the human way of measuring war might inspire unrest among their own people. A warlord from the Zyran clusters reportedly smashed a viewing console in anger, declaring that such weakness must not spread. Yet even in those halls, doubt had begun to take root. Elias, for his part, returned to his assigned quarters without ceremony. He did not watch the broadcasts or read the analysis. He sat by the window instead, looking out at the curve of the council planet against the starfield. Mara joined him after a while, holding a tablet that kept buzzing with incoming reports. "You're a trending topic on 27 Worlds," she said, half amused and half concerned. "Some are calling you the protector. Others are calling you the man who refused the count." Elias kept his eyes on the stars. "Names don't matter. What matters is whether they start asking themselves who else they've never counted, and should have." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you think they will?" He thought about that. Some will, most won't. But even if 1 in 1,000 starts counting differently, that's still worth it. Outside, ships moved in slow arcs, their hulls catching the sunlight. Somewhere out there, he knew, more battles were brewing. The galaxy was not going to change overnight. But maybe, just maybe, it had taken its first step toward something better. The next morning, the council convened again. This time, the air in the chamber felt different. Delegates were more restless. The issue was no longer just Ilias's number. It was what that number meant for humanity's place among the great powers. Some wanted to welcome humans into the council's inner circle, believing their philosophy could balance the galaxy's endless conflicts. Others wanted to keep them at a distance, afraid that their values would challenge the old order. Elias listened to it all without speaking. He knew this was not a fight to be won in a single day. Ideas, like seeds, needed time to grow, and the shockwave he had set off was still moving, reaching places even he couldn't imagine. By the end of the session, one thing was clear: humanity was no longer being measured by the same. The challenge came 3 days later. Elias and Mara had been preparing to leave the council world when a message arrived, not through official channels, but as a direct summons from the Korthon Dominion, one of the most feared militaristic powers in the galaxy. The message was short and sharp: "Meet us in the Hall of Blades. Prove your worth, or your words mean nothing." The Hall of Blades was a vast chamber carved into the side of a mountain, open to the cold wind and the bright blue sky. Its walls were lined with ancient weapons, each one representing a battle. The Korthons had won. Here, warriors came to settle disputes, not with armies, but with tests of skill and courage. When Elias arrived, the Korthon High Warlord was waiting. He was massive, his armor etched with the names of enemies defeated. His voice rolled like thunder. "Human," he said, "you spoke before the Council of Lives Saved. The Korthon Dominion does not measure victory that way. You have been called here to prove that your measure is not weakness." Mara stood at Ilias's side, tense but silent. She knew the Korthons respected only two things: victory and endurance. This would not be a polite conversation. Elias looked up at the warlord, without flinching. "And how do you propose I prove that?" The warlord gestured toward a platform in the center of the hall. "A trial, not to the death, though some have failed to walk away, but a trial of survival and command. You will lead a team through our gauntlet. Succeed, and we will acknowledge your claim. Fail, and your words will be forgotten." Elias glanced at Mara. She gave him a small nod. "We'll do it," he said. The gauntlet began at the far end of the hall. It was no simple obstacle course. It was a simulation designed to push leaders to their limits. The floor shifted without warning, creating sudden gaps. Walls closed in, forcing quick decisions. Mechanical drones attacked in swarms, their strikes harmless, but forceful enough to knock a man down if he hesitated. Elias was given 5 volunteers. Not soldiers, but a mix of Korthon civilians, a young cadet, and even a one-eyed merchant who had never been in a battle. The warlord's intent was clear. If Elias believed in protecting life, let him protect those least able to protect themselves. From the moment the trial began, Elias treated it like a real mission. He didn't bark orders for speed. He moved carefully, keeping his group close together. When the first swarm of drones came, he positioned himself at the front, drawing their attacks while the others slipped past. When a section of the floor dropped away, leaving a gap too wide for the smallest volunteer to jump, Elias didn't tell them to leave the weak behind. He ordered the others to form a chain, locking arms so they could pull each person across. Time was running out, but he refused to abandon anyone. The warlord watched from the high platform, arms folded. Around him, other Korthons murmured, puzzled. Most leaders in the gauntlet raced ahead to secure their own survival. This human was wasting precious seconds to save every last member of his team. Halfway through, the path split in two, one side short and dangerous, the other longer but safer. The obvious choice for anyone seeking glory was the short path. Elias didn't hesitate. He took the safer route, knowing it would cost them points, but keep his team alive. By the final section, the group was exhausted, but still together. The last challenge was a steep climb under a rain of harmless but stinging projectiles. The cadet slipped near the top, dangling by one hand. Without thinking, Elias leaned back over the edge, gripping the cadet's arm with both hands and hauling him up, taking several hits to his own back in the process. They crossed the finish line as a unit, bruised, tired, but unbroken. The warlord stepped down from his platform, his heavy boots striking the stone floor. He studied Elias for a long moment before speaking. "You took longer than any who have passed this trial in recent memory," he said. "Yet you lost no one." "That," Elias replied, "was the point." The warlord's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, he gave a short nod. "Perhaps. There is more than one way to measure strength." He turned to his people. "The human's words stand. His measure is his own, and it has merit." For the Korthons it was the closest thing to an admission of respect. Mara exhaled, a faint smile on her face, as they left the Hall of Blades. Elias said quietly, "They didn't need me to win their trial. They needed to see that my way works." Mara glanced at him, "And now they have." Weeks had passed since. Ilias Rourke stood in the council chamber and spoke the number that left the galaxy silent. The official meetings had ended, and the council had moved on to other matters, but his words had not faded. They had grown, on distant colony worlds. Teachers began telling students the story of the human captain who refused to count the dead. In quiet mess halls aboard cargo ships, crews replayed the footage of his speech, some shaking their heads, others nodding slowly, as if something deep inside them had been waiting to hear it. In the Korthon Dominion, the High Warlord's unexpected acknowledgments spread faster than wildfire. Some warriors mocked it, but others began to wonder. Young recruits started asking different questions, not just how many enemies they could defeat, but how many lives they could protect while doing it. It was a small change, but small changes had a way of growing into storms. For Elias, life returned to a quieter rhythm. He was back aboard his ship, the Resolute, not leading battles but guiding supply convoys, escorting medical fleets, and visiting border stations where old tensions still flickered. Mara stayed by his side, always ready with sharp observations and an unwavering belief in his way of doing things. One evening, as the Resolute drifted between stars, Mara entered the observation deck to find Elias staring at the endless black. "Thinking about the council again?" she asked. "Not the council," he said softly. "The people who heard me. I wonder how many will remember it a year from now, or if it will just be another speech lost in the noise." Mara stepped closer, her voice certain. "They'll remember. Not all of them, maybe, but enough. You planted something, Captain. That doesn't just vanish." Elias smiled faintly. "Seeds don't grow without care. And sometimes," Mara said, "they grow in places you don't expect." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the slow rotation of a nearby gas giant, its clouds glowing softly in the starlight. Over the next months, messages began arriving from unlikely places. A commander from the Avira clans wrote to say he had changed the training program for his officers to include civilian rescue drills. A Dravax colonel reported that his troops had started counting not just confirmed kills, but confirmed evacuations. And on the mining moons of the Endrel system, a small memorial was built, not to honor soldiers who had died, but to thank those who had ensured miners lived to see another sunrise. Elias read each message carefully. He didn't reply to most. Some were too personal, others too simple to need an answer, but he kept them all. He stored them in a small box in his quarters, alongside the few keepsakes he carried from his years of service. The galaxy still fought. Wars still burned. But the way people thought about those wars was beginning to shift in small, steady ways. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't peace. But it was a step. One day, Ilias received an official summons from the council again. This time, it wasn't for questioning. It was for ceremony. When he arrived, the great chamber looked the same. The banners, the tiers, the bright light at the center. But the atmosphere was different. Delegates from dozens of worlds rose as he entered, a gesture of respect rarely shown to anyone outside their own species. The council chair spoke first. "Captain Rourke, you came before us and gave a measure we did not know how to weigh. Since then, your measure has traveled farther than any order we have passed in this hall. You reminded us that strength can be more than destruction. For this, the Council grants you honorary status among the great commanders of the Galactic War Council, not for victories won, but for lives preserved." Elias accepted the honor with the same quiet dignity he had shown from the start. He knew titles were only symbols, but sometimes symbols mattered, especially when they could light the way for others. After the ceremony, Mara joined him on the steps outside the chamber. The twin suns of the council world were setting, painting the sky in gold and crimson. "Looks like your count grew again," she said with a grin. Elias glanced at her. 17 billion and counting, he said. They stood there together, watching the light fade. Somewhere across the galaxy, a young officer might be choosing to hold the line a little longer so an evacuation ship could launch. Somewhere else, a fleet commander might be deciding to measure victory in lives saved instead of lives taken. Those moments would never make headlines. They would never be celebrated with parades. But they were the kind of victories Elias valued most. The quiet, stubborn ones that kept hope alive in a galaxy that too often forgot it. And as the stars came out above them, Elias Rourke felt certain of one thing: the number would keep growing, for as long as there were people willing to count it.